Welcome to the One Advantage podcast, exploring the intersections of peer power, culture, and agility. Your hosts, Mike Richardson, Jason Richmond, and Leo Butari, co-founders of the One Advantage community of practice and advantage peer groups. For more information, please visit us at the One Advantage podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the One Advantage podcast. It's myself and Jason today. I have no idea where Leo is. I just know he is all over the place all the time. And we've got a good one today. We thought to ourselves, okay, if it's you and me, Jason, what can we talk about that could be like a collision between the two of us? And so we are going to talk, everybody, about Agile leadership, which is kind of my end of it, and Resolute values, which is kind of Jason's end of it. And we are going to run at those two things, make a massive collision, because we believe the combination of those two things can add up to long-term success. But first and foremost, of course, I want to know, where have you been and what you've been up to, Jason?
You know, this week. Well, first of all, I'm coming to you today with from the foot of Vail Mountain in Colorado.
Oh,
I'm gonna at some point this weekend try to put skis back on my feet.
Nice.
See if I don't break a knee or something. Right?
Oh, cool.
It's been a while since I haven't tackled that. No, but I've really spent the last couple weeks, kind of hunkered down in my office, working with clients, working on next steps, projects, setting my schedule. The month of March and April are going to be quite busy with travel and client engagements and things. So really kind of did a lot of 2023 in the last couple weeks. We're ready to go. Yeah,
and actually, we won't name names here, but we had a kickoff meeting with a joint client, didn't we? And we're kicking off a big new project, and we brought a third person into the mix that I've worked with many times before, which we're excited about. So, and that's all about, agility and culture and all of that kind of stuff at the end of the day. Everything is always about agility and culture at the end of the day. I have been physically here, but virtually I have been all over the world again. I was on a conference call with a bunch of Australians last night. I've been on conference calls with a bunch of people in South America frequently, conference calls with folks in the UK, done a number of trainings and team meetings and all kinds of things with people all over the place. So it's just great to be able to do that. So let's turn to our topic here. And there's a great quote here from Thomas Jefferson. And I know Leo loves this quote. And it says, "In matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock." And I really love that, because that kind of sets up kind of the "and" proposition, doesn't it? Right?
Yep.
Which is, some things need to be like a rock, some things need to go with the flow. And it really is a great description of what agility really is all about. We need to be firm and stand like a rock on our core values, and yet, of course, we need to go with the flow, with where the future's going. And so that's what we're gonna explore today, everybody. When you start to think about that, Jason, how do you begin to think about? Oh no! Before we go on, of course, we know a thing or two about this, because we have both written books. This is Jason's book, Culture Ignited: The 5 Principles of Adaptive Leadership. And this was my book. It's back in 2011, so it's a few years ago now. The Agile Executives Manifesto, which is all about agile leadership. So we know a thing or two about this topic. How do you think about it, Jason?
Well, I was thinking about this morning. So yesterday, I've been working the last 2.5 years with a pretty good size distribution company. And I was in a meeting with them yesterday, and they were planning their annual strategy meeting and stuff. I helped facilitate their annual strategic planning and those types of things the last couple of years. And I was working with John on the agenda, and boy, he was struggling with, how do we make this different? What approach do we take? How do we put some life into this? And I simply said, John, I said, you're going in with the mindset and the focus of strategic planning, right? What if we shift our thinking to strategic doing?
Nice.
And the light bulbs went off. And in 30 minutes, we had this agenda created for this 2-day meeting, but it went from process, structure, planning, goals to values, to behaviors, to actions, to outcomes, to actual human capital, right? So this whole meeting is fundamentally going to be different than it has been in the past, just because of the mind shift difference from planning to actual doing.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm sure you would agree. I might even take that a little bit further: strategic doing, and if not strategic being.
Yeah.
Right. How do we be that strategic presence? How do we be that leadership presence, who's a pillar of strength around the rock of our core values? And then how do we be that agile leadership presence, which is, look, we know we got to go with the flow. We got to, the future is unfolding. We better unfold with it ahead of the curve if we can, because we really have no option. We have to keep going with the flow. So I love that. And so that seemed to land well with your client and seemed to shape up well. Tell us more.
Well, and again, it's all going to be based around their core values.
Yeah.
Right now, I like to use, I talk about ideal outcomes, core values all the time, and we're in conversations all the time about how do we truly live them, or how do we make them a part of our business. And I'm proud of sharing what my core values are for my organization. The first one's customer centricity, right? And people ask me, well, how is that a true value? And I says, because it is demonstrated in every behavior of every team member I have, in every action they do every day.
Yeah.
Part of our decision-making process is any decision we make, how does it impact the customer?
Yeah. My guess is that, whilst a list of core values isn't necessarily in sequential order, it's not by accident that that's the top of the list, number one.
It exactly is. So this strategic meeting we're having, this strategic doing meeting is going to be around their values. The other ones is courageous innovation. We start out every meeting we have. My company has a biweekly Friday morning meeting, and our whole conversation in that hour-long meeting, sure, there's some updates and that kind of stuff, but a big portion of it is challenging the status quo. Do we need to adapt? And we do this bi-weekly. And then integrity and information sharing comes through in our communication, and making sure we always have a strategic balance. So I do a lot of work with organizations about taking those values and how do you really embed those into a behavior standpoint. And that's the work we've been doing with a couple of different companies lately in this distribution company, and going into this meeting in April. So it's going to be taking those core values and turning those into leadership behaviors, and actually how they behave and how they do.
Yeah, because we've mentioned this before, haven't we? Because and I think you'll agree with this. Everybody, it's very hard to hold somebody accountable for integrity.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I just don't think, you're living up, to integrity, or yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're not. So unless I translate integrity into some behavioral norms that I can see and hear around here, or see and hear the absence of around here, then I really can't hold you accountable for integrity. So I love what you've said about translating core values that, if we're not careful, are quite abstract, they're quite nebulous, they're just sort of hanging out on the walls if we've got some poster, into sort of day-to-day, practical, pragmatic, observable and audible behavioral norms. Is that where you're headed, Jason?
Yep, exactly. You're exactly right. A prime example. Okay, I've lived, I think everybody knows this. I used to live downtown Chicago. I lived there for over 15 years. I was in the heart of the city kind of person, and during those years, I fell in love with Second City. Second City published a book and work around it called Yes and. Right.
Yeah.
But you want to talk about a leadership behavior that's noticeable. How many times in meetings, Mike, your client meetings, it's but I've done it.
Yeah.
That kind of reaction.
Yeah.
Well,
I love
the
that.
work I did with them in Ideal Outcomes changed our whole perception about how we take in ideas and have collaboration sessions. And it's never we've tried that didn't work.
Yeah.
It's yes, and let's continually adding more value and more integrity into that common thought process that bubbles up through the organization.
I love that.
It's a prime example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. Everybody, and Jason knows this, right? We so many things in life come back to an and proposition, right? I can't really think of anything that isn't an and proposition. It isn't an or proposition of this or that. It's an and proposition of this and that. Correct. It's rarely 100% that and 0% this. It's usually at least 99-1 or 199 or 80-20 or 60-40 or whatever it is. So I love the and proposition, and I couldn't agree more that I don't know how far back, I probably learned the hard way that, and partly because I was trained by Dale Carnegie and I became a Dale Carnegie instructor. I just learned, if I can feel that I'm getting into a tricky spot in a conversation, if we're not careful here, it's going to get a little bit argumentative. Someone's coming at me with a strong opinion about something. The very best thing I can do when they're finished is just say, and. And I just say, and actually I was doing it yesterday, funnily. We were having a complex conversation yesterday with three of us, and there was a fantastic lady on the call who was sort of coming from a particular angle, and she finished, and I said and she started again, and she gave me something else, and she finished, and I said and she gave me something else, and this went on about 5 times, and eventually she finished. And I said, and she didn't say anything. So I was then able to come and say, and, I think we can look at it from this angle and this angle and this angle as well. And she said, oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So I love that. I want to go back to something else that you said as well, in that you just gave us a beautiful summary of, I think, your 5 or 6 core values: customer centricity, innovation, integrity, I think strategic balance or something like that. And, in all the work I do, everybody, and in Jason's work as well, it all revolves around adaptive leadership, agile management, all this kind of stuff. And what I'll do is I'll sort of show people their core values, and I'll say, so where is agility in there? And of course, there are several options that now present themselves. Well, if we're really committed to agility, we could add agile or agility as an additional item if we wanted to. And I'll say, you don't have to do that. You could just frame these core values in a kind of an agility framework, maybe the way that you produce this artifact into some kind of poster. Maybe there's some kind of backdrop that conveys agility or uses the words agility. Or you could just sort of double click on each of these core values, and in the way that you expand them and write them out, you could embed the agility themes, because there's nothing more agile, everybody, than customer centricity. That is the essence of agility. It was the essence of lean, and it's now the essence of agile. And in many ways, agile is sort of lean turned inside out. So the question then is for everybody is, how do you get agility to show up in your core values? There's no right or wrong way to do that, so that it becomes embedded, because that is the name of the game, Jason, is it not? I mean, you're going to have to be on your toes. You're going to have to pivot again, and just keep up with this increasingly accelerating world of disruptive change.
Yeah, you've heard me talk about the public utility company I work with all the time. Our last session a month ago that we talked about, they have a whole bunch of new leadership. They've had some succession planning. They've had new players come to the team. They had a handful of people retire, so they've been backfilled. So we really spent up front talking about what what really is the roles of the leaders on this team. We ultimately got to a common purpose and that type of stuff. But we started out talking about what are your roles really? If you really think from an entire leadership team, not you as an individual, but from a team perspective, what are your roles? And they come up with things like, it's our responsibility to diagnose and make decisions, right? And do that in a timely manner, and to do that in a sequence enough to, if we see something that needs to be course corrected or adjusted, we can do that. That was the first one. The other one that came out is as a leadership team, we need to be an implementer of change.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So we need to not be afraid to bring change to the table and implement change in the organization, the direction we're going. The third one is around performance management, implementer of action, people taking action. And then the last one, which I thought was so insightful, because most of the teams don't get there, Mike, and this is a pure Agile skill in my book, is to take time to reflect on what we've learned, right? So these are these leadership roles that they came up, and then we tied their 10 commandments and their core values into those roles of the leaders.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're walking out and a handful of them come up and says, I've been leading the wrong way for years.
Right.
I've been here 20 years, and I've totally been leading the wrong way.
Yeah. And I love what you said about reflecting, taking stock, stepping back, and sort of checking in with, so how are we doing? How are we doing against our core values? How are we doing against our leadership roles and competencies? How are we doing against our guiding principles and all that kind of stuff? And I think it takes courage to do that, because quite likely, everybody, if you create enough safety for people to really speak up, and we talked about this in the last podcast, the sort of hidden costs, the hidden pain, the hidden frustrations, that if you're not careful causes your talent to walk out the door the first chance they get. If you really make it safe for people to really score, against your core values safely, you might not like the answer, but at least now you know where the gaps are. And at least now you can begin to sort of brainstorm, perhaps against each of the 5 or 6 core values. Well, okay, we didn't score very highly against that one. There's a big gap there. What are 2 or 3 or 4 simple things that we could begin to do to start closing that gap? Is it going to close the gap, fully all the way, all of a sudden? Of course not. That's a long haul. But can we send the message to everybody that we are committed to going on the journey of closing these gaps and running that marathon? That was our theme last time in the podcast, wasn't it? Culture is a marathon, not a sprint. Running the marathon of closing these gaps over time. But it takes some courage to kind of get everybody in a room, do some scoring, and look in the mirror truly on, well, how are we doing? And by the way, not just on core values, but how are we doing with agility? Because agility, as we've talked about many times, agility is very prone to misinterpretation. People think that to be agile, I just need to be nimble, flexible, turn on a dime, right? That is not agility at all, everybody. If you're not careful, that is disorganized chaos. Yep. And if you go back to Jason's core values and you sort of, you read between the lines or you look at the granularity, I don't think it says anywhere in there that we prefer disorganized chaos. I'm sure it doesn't say that. I'm sure it says, probably not in these words, I'm sure it says we prefer organized chaos. Yep. Life is going to be fast moving. It is going to be chaotic. As long as we can keep that chaos organized, we're okay. And that's what agility is, everybody. So I don't know. Thoughts on all of that, Jason?
Well, no, I love it. I love what you said. And it usually starts with, like you said, a reflection. Where are we missing it? And where's our gaps? Any leader out there listening to us today, I recommend them to really, with their teams of people, frame the situation correctly, transparently, authentically, clear, paint the right picture. And Mike, you touched upon this. What could we do? Right? Green light thinking, right? Yeah. Add it all up, everything we could do. And then as a team, get that narrowed down to what should we do? Yeah. And then in an agile way, what will we do to get this thing started? You can't eat the entire onion.
Yeah. And exactly. And by the way, everybody, Jason knows this. I'm a pretty provocative kind of guy. So when I do work around core values, what I would typically do, let's suppose I'm walking into a client and they've got a nice set of core values like Jason has. And let's suppose that it's nicely produced on a framed poster on the wall. And let's suppose that there's a nice paragraph for each core value, and it begins to describe those observable and audible behavioral norms that we're looking for. I'll typically want to do two things. I'll say, look, I want you to imagine two other posters, one to the right and one to the left. Let's start with the one on the right. The one on the right is going to not be a replacement for your core values. It's going to kind of like put some sprinklings on your core values. And it's going to be the sort of agility and adaptability principles that we buy into. Fail fast, fail cheaply, fail early. Yep. Because you cannot succeed without failure. Because in many companies, if you're not careful, and a whole bunch of other sort of agile principles like that, because if you're not careful in many companies, when you read their core values, if you're not careful, you could interpret those core values to say avoid failure, right? Play safe, go slow, right? If you're not careful, I'm not saying that yours say that because you've got courageous innovation and all that. But if you look at some core values, if you're not careful, reading between the lines, you could interpret it to say that. So let's put a chart on the right that says the exact opposite. And then you know where I'm going next. The one on the left is I like to facilitate the client to capture the excuses that we typically use around here the most. I was too busy. I didn't have time. I don't know how. I'm confused. The dog, the last one on the list, just for a laugh, is the dog ate my homework kind of thing. And we number them. We give them a number. So that halfway in a meeting, if someone starts to say that, we just point up and say, oh, you mean number 6? And it just takes the sting out of, if we're not careful, we're not getting the core values we want. We're getting these other things, aren't we? Excuses and just explanations as to why I couldn't get something done. What are your reactions to all of that?
I've seen it. I've seen it so many times. But the ahas that come away from a leadership group or a group, a team going through an exercise like that is amazing, Mike. I talk about my work in culture and having a culture mindset. We talked last podcast about if the pain's not great enough, people aren't going to change or focus on evolving their culture. And I think about our conversation today, really driving agile behaviors in our leadership, making sure our values are alive in our culture and stuff. In order for all this to work, I think, in my opinion, there's 3 major components of this cultural mindset that you have to have. Your organization, you got to have that level of psychological safety there for it to work.
Yep.
Right. Your leadership team and your workforce have to be inclusive. You got to be open. You got to be honest. You got to be inclusive. And the third thing is you are not going to be successful if you don't come in this in a transparent way. You have to be transparent with this. You have to demonstrate what you want your workforce to be and do and how they look and how they act and how they behave.
Yeah.
Right. So from a cultural mindset, incorporating values with our agile leadership abilities, I think those 3 things have to be in place. That it has to be a psychologically safe place. It has to be an inclusive environment, and it's got to be filled with transparency.
Yeah, and the leader needs to go first with the transparency, the humility, the authenticity, the vulnerability, to set the bar that everybody else feels safe then to go to as well. And in the peer group world that Leo and I have been so deeply engaged in, it's typically the forum leader who needs to go there first.
Yeah,
and to show that they're willing to sort of self-disclose, willing to be very vulnerable in front of the group, because it sort of opens a trapdoor and lets everybody peer down and realize it's okay to go there. And the forum leader just took us to a new depth of that. And I'm now more comfortable to go there myself. And sometimes it's a member. Sometimes it's a member that brings a particular issue and just goes deeper than you might ever have imagined. And all of a sudden, the forum is experiencing a wow moment together. It's like, wow, what just happened here for that member that brought that issue? But also what they're realizing is, wow, I just got permission to go that deep if and when I need to. Yeah. That is the culture. Those are the core values. That is the agility that lives right here, right now in this team environment. Really, a peer forum is really a team environment. And Leo's work is all about, peer innovation is all about how do you take from these external peer forums. How do you take that culture, those core values, that transparency into the team environment inside your organization? Yeah. So this is all circling around really nicely. Yeah. Yep. So everybody, it's really, I think as we begin to sort of tie a bow around all this, Jason, really, if you can start to get the combination of the rock of your core values and the flow of your agility, if you can start to get those two things to come together as an and proposition, then you really have a great opportunity to achieve the ultimate goal, which is to be future-proofed. Now, can you ever be 100% certain that you're future-proofed? Of course not. But can you be sort of building yourself more and more of an insurance policy? Can you be stacking the odds more and more and more in your favor? Yep. That no matter what comes at us next, we have the inbuilt agility, we have the inbuilt ethos of our core values and our culture, that we can not just survive whatever comes next, but we can thrive in whatever comes next. What are your thoughts on that, just to begin landing this plane, Jason?
I agree with you, 100%. I mean, we got this thing called VUCA out there that's, isn't going to be 100%. That's going to drive change. But our ability to be in tune with the relationship with values and agility and the way we behave, how we reflect, how we implement action, how we change, I think you're going to have an awful lot higher probability of being successful.
Yeah, everybody, VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. You've heard us use that a number of times, I'm sure. We live in an accelerating VUCA world, do we not, everybody? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And what Jason is saying is, what we're saying is, when you have the combination of your core values and agility, VUCA is full of opportunity. Yep. When you don't have the combination of the rock of your core values and the flow of your agility coming together as an and proposition, then VUCA is full of threat and downside risk as opposed to upside opportunities. So there we have it, everybody. We missed Leo today. We'll be catching up with him next time, I'm sure. In fact, next time, I think we're going to do the trust barometer.
We are
a research study that Leo loves and we love too. So we'll look into that. And have yourself a great couple of weeks, Jason. Have yourselves a great couple of weeks, everybody out there. That was another episode of the One Advantage podcast. Come back and be with us again next time. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the One Advantage podcast. If you liked this episode, please consider helping us by rating us wherever you listen, spreading the word, having us as a guest on your podcast or webinar, and mentioning us in social media. Find us at the One Advantage podcast, where you can get more information about us and this episode. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to more great episodes to come.